He likes giving all your dragons a cost reduction, doing cross-stitch, and also beating his wings so fiercely that he gives birth to dragons from the ensuing storm. It's the Dragon, and he's checking into the House of WUBRG right now. Greetings, I'm Lee. Welcome to the House of WUBRG, where we create 5-colour commander brews. We hope you enjoy your stay. Stick around for a card that can steal all your opponent's lands, a 2-card combo that can destroy up to 25 permanents, including lands. Sorry! And an amazing way that you can randomise your game experience. But first, let's have a look at today's commander, which is the Dragon. The Dragon costs 4 white, blue, black, red and green, is a legendary creature dragon avatar, and is a 10/10. And it has Eminence. As long as the Dragon is in the command zone or on the battlefield, other dragon spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. It has Flying, and whenever one or more dragons you control attack, draw that many cards, then you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. Before we get into it, this video is called a tribute to Tribal because it builds on the outstanding work of the Tribal community, including the patron saint of Tribal, Tomer Abrumovich. He has some incredible articles, which I've linked in the description below. He's moulded the archetype. It is the deck that he says is most associated with him. God, I would love to have a deck associated with me one day. That's on the bucket list. So, have to pay homage to those people. There's loads of people out there who love Tribal, so look them up if you are inspired to build this deck as well. However, I first encountered this deck being piloted by Arthur on game nights, and it was love at first sight. I knew I had binders filled with cards that could go into this deck. I knew that it would be different to play every game. I knew that it would win differently every game. I knew that it could adapt to different meta changes, and I knew that every single set that came out, because they usually have so much Tribal support, there would be a smorgasbord of options for me to adapt, upgrade, to consider, to theory craft and mull over. And I'm a more is more person. But most of all, I wanted to attack with werewolf, frog, ninja assassins. I wanted to turn sideways demon dragons, and this deck provides you with all the hilarity of being able to send a creature with all creature types currently being supported by Tribal Lords and Tribal support, send it across and say the immortal words, "You are being attacked by an octopus ninja." I knew I needed that in my life. This is why this is my favourite deck. So my job today is to share my own list and my thoughts about how to play Tribal, and to build on the work of others, to innovate using cards from recent sets, Dominaria and 40k decks, about Baldur's Gate, cards that I haven't seen in other lists, because there's always something to pop into this deck. That's why I absolutely adore it. It's the reason I love Magic. This deck epitomises everything I love about this amazing game that we all play. So the constant across Tribal decks has to be the shapeshifters that have Changeling. Remember, all creatures with Changeling have shapeshifter creature type, but not all shapeshifters have Changeling. These creatures are just waiting around for a lord or lady to teach them new tricks. The majority of the rest of the cards are Lords and Tribal support cards that give some kind of bonus, stat gain, or enters the battlefield effect. So if you want a creature that enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your opponent's library, mills 3 when it attacks and then creates a token when it connects, and is a Nightmare, Horror, Frog, Griffin, then this deck is probably for you. Pretty standard in most Tribal decks are the Changelings. There are 18 in my deck, and they're supported by Masquerade Nexus, which can cause an identity crisis for any of our Tribal Lords. The Dragon can't reduce the cost of a Changeling outcast, but can make the Masked Vandal 1 generic less to cast because all Changelings have the Dragon creature type. Mirror Entity is the classic white finisher that steamrolls opponents and changes creature types at instant speed. Amio Boyd Changeling, look at that squidgy face! Oh, he is Mirror Entity and Master's best pal, changing and stripping creature types, which helps against anti-tribal tech, for example, the destroy all human part of the card Zombie Apocalypse. Shapesharer can make a target shapeshifter into a Tribal Lord to double up on an ETB or effect. Morophon reduces the cost of a chosen creature type. I usually choose Dragon in this deck, and can make a 1 casting cost Changeling like Changeling Outcast 3, or more importantly, the Dragon cost 4 generic mana to cast. You'll be surprised how often you get to bring the Dragon out and this is one of the ways that makes it possible. And then we have useful abilities like being able to cast a chosen creature type off the top of our library, give pseudo ward to all of our changelings, or just grow a big beefy changeling ready to smash face. So these 3 ramp options on the screen are pretty standard among tribal decks: Manawef Sliver, Gemhide Sliver, Catilda. I also have an off-theme Cryptolith Right, and all those cards are allowing our changelings to tap for mana, which means we've got a potential 18 plus mana dorks for our early game. Magda synergizes with this beautifully because whilst they're tapping for mana, they are also going to be dwarves, and they're going to create treasure which we can use to ramp for other dragons, inverted commas, that could be changelings, or the actual legitimate fire breathers that we have in the deck. And things get really stupid with Risen Reef because it draws us cards to put lands into play every time an elemental enters the battlefield, and of course, again, we have loads of those as well. My innovations to the standard deck lists, there's Herald of Slaanesh from the Warhammer Precons, which makes our demons cheaper by 2, and then they gain haste. And Ravaz taps for 2 colours in a dragon's cost and recurs slain dragons. So it's a mana dork and it also recurs cards. Love that, double dipping. And all our changelings are both of the creature types we have just talked about. They are demons and they are dragons. My favourite new addition is Realmbreaker, that name checks the Phyrexian creature type. It steals lands from opponents, but more importantly for this deck, an investment of 10 generic mana will tutor out for us every single changeling we run. And remember, Maskwood gives that creature type to every creature that's not on the battlefield, which is absolutely nuts. Here are some standouts from Tome's list. Liliana's Contract will draw 4 cards for 5 mana and 4 life loss, which I think is a pretty good rate. It's huge, but it also acts as a win con due to the amount of demons, in inverted commas, we run. Graveborn Muse draws us cards equal to the number of zombies we have in play, with a cost to our life equal to those rotting bodies. And then, Yuriko. I used to have a Yuriko deck, but I took it apart, and look, now I'm running another Yuriko deck. One of my favourite games was against a player who was playing Yuriko. Can you imagine playing Yuriko? Well, I can, because I had Yuriko in my deck and loads of ninjas. And I got my Yuriko out first and then proceeded to take apart the table, as Yuriko does, but also take apart the Yuriko player, giving them a big glug of changeling medicine. That's the thing in this deck. You will go up against people and you will be playing their commanders as well and give them a "this is how it feels" moment. But somehow you get away with it because you didn't optimize your deck along those lines. It's just happenstance that you happen to have Yuriko and a load of ninjas. I mean, you can commit crimes with tribal, and you can get away with it. Unesh is a card that I often think about taking out, but then when I remember what it does and the boatload of card advantage it provides with its fact or fiction style effect, I can't take it out of the deck. It's incredible. And Mari is an innovation of my own because it gives all our assassins, mercenaries and rogues death touch and a way to draw cards and to ramp. Honestly, this deck is marvellous. My most recent innovation is Be'lakor from the Warhammer Precon, drawing us cards for the number of demons we control, and then has an added Warstorm Surge effect. I love this double dipping. There's draw and there is also a win con on that card. And every time a changeling hits the field, it deals damage equal to its power. Sidar from March of the Machine lets us loot on attack with knights and recurs fallen knights on combat damage. And Zergo and Ojutai trigger off of our dragons, dealing damage, letting us look at cards on top of our library and keep one, while giving us the option to put a dragon back in our hand to recast for an ETB another turn. And finally, from Jumpstart, Ashcote. So pumps our rats on attack and block and mills 4 before recurring rats to our hand. There's so much incidental recurrence from Ashcote, Sidar, Ravaz. You have no idea how many times I've had to make inverted commas with my fingers when I've been mentioning creature types. But now we move on to the win cons. I may have to sit down for this. I am already sitting down. Phew, good for me. Hellkite Corsair is so much fun. Your opponents will be sitting there scoffing internally at the idea that you will ever cast your commander and then, whoops, Hellkite brings Dragon out for a quick 10-10 bop to the face, and that is commander damage, plus the Dragon's attack trigger is a huge turn for only 6 mana. Speaking of impactful dragons, Utfara Hellkite holds the record for card most present when I've won with this deck. Every dragon attacking makes another huge dragon, and we run 18 plus dragons. Some of my personal innovations include, from Baldur's Gate Miriam, creating copies of our dragons, false or otherwise. Urtet from Albury 1, creating and untapping mirrors and pumping them for a lovely investment of WUBRG. And then, if I wasn't hyperventilating enough, my favourite inclusion in win cons, and one I have nearly pulled off, Ramses Assassin Lord. Just one Changeling. Just one Changeling is all it takes to win the entire game. The flavour is phenomenal. People aren't supposed to see an assassin coming, and they won't when it's dressed up as a Changeling. Then we've got Zask from Jumpstart. Lets us play our Changeling spells from the graveyard. I say spells because this includes Crib Swap, which is a tribal spell that exiles creatures and can end up being very cheap or even free with the right combination of lords. For example, Herald says demon spells cost 2 less, Crib Swap is a demon spell, and Zask says you can cast it from the graveyard. If you get Morophon out and it reduces it by 1 white, exile the entire board of creatures. And of course, Zask can also casually pump your team and gives them Death Touch and reconstitutes our insects back into our library on death. Why not make the team pseudo unblockable with Herald of Hoofbeats from March of the Machine, or one of my favourite card arts ever, Cover of Darkness, giving a creature type of our choice fear. And finally, there's 2 battles that I'm testing out as my playgroup is trying to include a battle in all of our decks. Invasion of Tarkia with targeted damage per dragon on the front, and an ETB of 2 damage per dragon on the flip. Also testing out Invasion of New Capenna, as our changelings are numerous and expendable for the exile effect on the front, but what we really want is to hook up the Holy Frazzle Cannon to a creature to pump those that share a type with counters on attack. Peer Pressure is a Tomer special, as we usually have the most creatures of a certain type on the battlefield because they are all of those types. I recently went to the dark side and put in Necrotic and Harmonic Slivers because I needed less fancy and more direct ways to interact with my opponent's board. Harmonic Sliver does what Orishaz does, a destroy ETB that can quite out of hand with the cost reduction from the Dragon. Living Death, one of my favourite black cards of all time. It's got board wipe and recursion, and there's lots of opportunities for ETBs from beyond the grave. Tomer's list put me onto these 2 also. Dragon Tempest gives haste to flies, but we don't have many. However, as the number of dragons builds up, the damage grows exponentially, decimating boards. And then the reason why I play this deck, Changelings breathe new life into tribes that are underrepresented. The Reaper King is a kill on sight card. It can target lands. The cost of our Changelings is so low with the Eminence that you can trigger this multiple times a turn with the right card draw in play. Plus, go nuts and write a replication, your Reaper King. I don't think your opponents needed those 25 permanents anyway, because all the Reaper Kings see each other and they will trigger off of each other. 25 permanents, including land. Protection, Drogskull Captain pumps and protects spirits, and Night Exemplar does the same for Knights. We have a fair few Night Spirits palling around, and they shall know no fear from the Warhammer decks is super flavorful, allowing us to save a creature type. And then, because my meta shifted towards more wipes, that actually contributed to me stopping playing this deck for a while, I've gone off book and put in some protection for my board. A well-placed wipe can take us out of the game. So Gilt Leaf Arch Druid for 3 and 2 green. Ooh, card advantage. Whenever you play a Druid spell, you may draw a card. That doesn't seem too bad. Oh, what? Tap 7, untap Druid you control, gain control of all lands target player controls. Ooh, tempting. You will also know by now, if you've seen my other deck text, I love an obscure card. Here's one, Total War, which totally ruins those value creatures your opponents don't want to send into the fray by stating that if they are a non-wall creature, if they don't attack and they are untapped, they are destroyed. I like how it puts a lot of pressure on players to make decisions before combat, bringing their plans forward, and I like how all our changelings are walls, so are unaffected. I am looking forward to picking this up and not spending £75 on the Sliver deck, but reap the rewards because I basically already play Slivers. I look forward to using this when the Reaper King is in play to destroy 3 permanents at a time when I encore my Slivers. This is one of those punch the air, I did it combos. When Iname enters the battlefield, put all your changelings into the graveyard because they're spirits, and then you can reanimate them with Living Death, triggering all sorts of chaotic ETB effects from Lords. Scarecrows, for example, taking out permanents, Elementals drawing and ramping for your library, or you drop the other half of the combo, Mortal Combat, and win with 20 or more creatures in your graveyard. And don't forget, we just got a new Knight precon and lots of Knight support from March of the Machine. You can make your changelings all valorous, I think that's a word, and noble and chivalrous. That's definitely a word. Finally, a way to randomize the experience. You can keep a stack of tribal support cards and lords in the same colour sleeves as the main deck. Just take out the current tribal support you have, noting their numbers, shuffle it all together and count out the same amount to go back in. It completely changes your deck, keeps it fresh, and you will discover new combinations of card effects that might direct how you build the deck in the future. So there it is, unusual synergies, varied win cons, and weird ephemeral creatures, and the option to say I attack you with my dragon, demon, spirit assassin, and then list off all the triggers. If you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me. Please join me on Thursday when I'm going to be doing a 5-colour mana base video. The plan is to strip out the expensive mana base of this deck that I've just covered and to install a cheap budget mana base. I think it's the best way to tackle 5-colour mana bases by looking at a deck and saying, what does the deck want to do and when does it want to do it, rather than talking about mana bases in a vacuum. Let's do it with purpose and context, and we'll do it with lots of different decks. If that's of interest to you, hit subscribe. And there is also coming up our first ever MTG Specs House of WUBRG punch up in the car park, free for all 5-colour madness. Join us for that. All of the decks that I've covered except for this one, the first 4 House of WUBRG decks, Omnath Locus of All, Atog, Tom Bombadil, and Niv Mizzet Supreme Modal Tribal. So thank you for spending your time with me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on MTG Specs.